Hi, everyone. Welcome to Café IBTTA. I'm Pat Jones. My guest today is Barb Rohde. Barb is the executive director of the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance, which was created as an educational organization to further information exchange on mileage-based user fee projects in the United States. Barb is also an independent consultant with Fager Drinker Consulting on a variety of issues. In addition to her work with MBUFA, Barb holds appointments as a research fellow, Washington, in transportation policy at the Humphrey School and the Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota. Prior to her work there, Barb served as the director of the State of Minnesota / Washington, D.C. office and served as chief of staff to Congressman and later Senator Byron Dorgan. Barb, welcome to Café IBTTA. It's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you, Pat. It's great to be here, and it's really fun to see everyone. I'm really enjoying it.
And a big shout out to all the members of the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance who are joining us today. We hope you're here in good force, and we are going to be talking about mileage-based user fees or VMT or RUC, whatever. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. So this is Café IBTTA, where we drink coffee and we talk about things that are interesting, relevant, uplifting, and fun. And today's going to be a very fun day. But first, I have a big announcement, and that is that I'm very pleased to announce that Mark Muriello has joined the IBTTA staff as a full-time employee to serve as our Director of Policy and Government Affairs. He's been working as a consultant with IBTTA since last November. In his new role, Mark will drive our policy on government affairs agenda, working closely with Kathy Ruffalo, IBTTA's outside lobbyist, and Bill Kramer, IBTTA's communications director. You may know that Mark recently retired from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey after 33 years of service, most recently serving as Deputy Director of the Tunnels, Bridges, and Terminals Department. Mark is no stranger to IBTTA, having served on the Board of Directors and Government Affairs Committee for many, many years. We're very excited to welcome Mark to the IBTTA family. Mark, welcome aboard. So this is Café IBTTA, and we are taking your questions. We're going to be talking to Barb about mileage-based user fees, and we want to get started right away. So in the chat function and selecting all panelists and attendees, give us one word or phrase that describes your feelings about mileage-based user fees. One word or phrase in the chat function here, and please select all panelists and attendees. All right, we have some words coming in here: fairness, the future, the time is now, flexibility, optimistic, future, needed. Yeah. What else? Long overdue, inevitable, crucial. Let's do it. Okay. We got some good thoughts here, Barb. I think you've got people on your side. We're gonna have a good conversation.
Yeah, I like what I'm seeing.
So keep those comments and feelings coming in. We'll return to them a little bit later in the program. But first, Barb, I want to talk about you. And you may know Krista Tippett from the podcast On Being. She likes to ask her guests, tell me about your spiritual upbringing. But I don't want to hear necessarily about your spiritual upbringing, but you are a daughter of the Great Plains from Pettibone, North Dakota. And Barb, I have to confess, I don't think I've ever met anybody from Pettibone, North Dakota. So tell us a little bit about Pettibone and your upbringing in North Dakota.
Well, thank you, Pat. And I always enjoy talking about North Dakota. Almost always when I meet people, they'll say, you're the first person I ever met from North Dakota. And, for all of us that grew up there, we're very used to that. So, my friends are from there we usually talk about it. Where I grew up on a farm, and as I tell people, the same 12 kids I started first grade with were almost the same 12 I graduated from high school with. I mean, not quite, but almost the same. Yeah. The town was 121 people when I lived there, and now it's about 62. Now, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was in grad school in Denver, the little town lost out to the town next door in the census by one person. And my mother tracked me down in Denver to make sure that I had filed my census as a student so that we could be equal to our little town next door. So, but actually, to some degree, I credit being from North Dakota is the reason I ended up in transportation, because that was not the area I was heading into. But I'm a licensed pilot, and when I worked on the Hill, North Dakota, I think we have the most pilots of any state other than Alaska. And there were so many questions and so many issues from our constituents on this. And trying to explain aviation issues to staff, I just said, let me take that portfolio. It's just easier if I take it. So that is a kind of a very odd way of how I ended up doing transportation.
And tell us a little bit about your affiliation with the Humphrey School and some of the work that you've done on Capitol Hill with Congressman Byron Dorgan. Tell us about that.
Well, when I finished grad school, Byron, I went on his campaign. I'd actually worked for him before when he was the tax commissioner of North Dakota. And it was just a great opportunity. I was on his staff for 6 years as his chief of staff. And what we dealt with a lot, we represented the whole state. So it's a little unlike other congressional offices in that, you've got a lot of territory you're covering. And we dealt, it really was interesting, but, transportation was at a lot of, it's a critical thing for people in rural areas. I mean, as it is for everyone, but I think sometimes people forget that it's the commerce way, it's, agriculture is so big in that state. And energy too. I mean, coal, all of that, it was important. So transportation we dealt with transportation kind of intermingled with many other areas there, but it was really fun. I'm really glad I had two areas. This has been very handy in this job. I also worked for the governor of Minnesota for 6 years. So both in St. Paul and out here. And I think having those two experiences of both being in a state capital, in a governor's office, plus being on Capitol Hill, it kind of helps me understand what people are facing, because these issues are very, I don't want to say ticklish, but they're thorny in some cases. And I think I understand at least a little bit of the challenges some of these people are facing from both sides.
Yeah, thorny issues. It seems like they're the only kind of issues we deal with these days, right? Well, Barb, you get a nice shout out from your friend and former colleague, Heidi Corcoran, who says, I had the honor and privilege of working alongside Barb during my time at University of Minnesota. This is really fun to see.
Oh, that's great. Well, Heidi didn't say that. I was chairman of the search committee that hired her. So, yes, I'm very glad she's on the call. It's nice to hear from her.
Barb, let's talk about the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance, MBUFA. Quite a mouthful. It really comes out with that plosive effect. I like that. I love acronyms that have good plosives in it, And you and Jack Basso were sort of the organizers of this, the leaders of this. What was it, 10 years ago? Tell us about the formation.
It's been 10 years ago. And actually it was due a lot in part to my work with the University of Minnesota. We were working on a project that was Hennepin County, which is the county that Minneapolis is based in, to do something similar to this. And what happened was Jim Whitty, who was running the Oregon program at that time, that we would both be on Capitol Hill at the same time. We were both looking for money to launch one of these programs. And, I remember one day I was going in an office when Jim was coming out. So, I said, this is crazy. From working on Capitol Hill all those years, that's what you want to have happen if you don't want to do anything. You want to have competing people so you can say to everybody, when you guys make up your mind, then come and see us. So I talked to Jim and I really credit Jim. He was very supportive of starting an organization where we could focus on this. And because of Jack's role, so I think most of you know Jack is a former assistant secretary at USDOT and a deputy director at AASHTO. He really had the credentials, and he was very, very insistent that we had to start looking at this. And I know, but I do want to say that even though Oregon was our first member, IBTTA was our first check. And I don't think
Barb, I don't care, about Oregon. The person who writes the first check,
that's right.
They're number one. Nobody remembers who got the silver medal in the Olympics, right? We wrote the first check.
You wrote the first check.
Okay?
You did.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
Pat.
absolutely.
And I don't think anybody that runs an organization can ever forget that. So it was it was very very helpful. And we're actually we were 10 years old in last year. And how the name came to be was that at that time, Chairman Oberstar really felt that we needed to use the term user fee. So, I think that that was, critical. It's not exactly something that easily rolls off your tongue, but as I say to people, we got through the IRS with the first try, and I'm not changing that name. So while I'm here, at least.
So Barb, it seems like mileage-based user fees, RUC, VMT, whatever you want to call it, it's moving pretty fast now. People, we know that Secretary Buttigieg talked about VMT in his confirmation hearing, and Senator Carper, of the chair of the Environment and Public Works Committee, I understand even this morning is talking about VMT in the EPW hearing. Tell us about the speed, the velocity of VMT and MBUF in this country.
Well, I really see it moving very fast right now. I was on a call last week with the House committee staff on the issue, and I think the week before with the Senate committee staff on this issue. And I think that we are, and it's really a bipartisan issue. I mean, Ranking Member Graves told me he wants this to be in place by the time he ever becomes chairman of that committee. So, I mean, and as I tell people, he's only 11 votes away from being chairman right now. So I think that's a little soon. But what I'm seeing in the Senate is that what I really think they're concentrating on right now is the national pilot. I mean, I believe there'll be state pilots in. For those of you who have looked at this legislation, you certainly know that there's I can't remember the millions right now, but there's 50 million in for a national pilot, I believe, in the Senate bill. And I think 40 million in the House bill. I should have looked that up before I got on. But I think both of those numbers are going to change dramatically because both of the bills are being rewritten. Now, as you probably know, Chairman Carper told President Biden, and for those of you that maybe don't follow politics quite as close as we do here in Washington, but Chairman Carper served with Joe Biden for, 15 years, I think, where they were the two senators from Delaware. So I'm assuming that President Biden is really looking to him for advice on this issue. Then we have Secretary Buttigieg saying that VMT is, he was the only presidential candidate to say that that was the funding mechanism. He's backed it a little bit. We laugh, we said some staff, they think have talked to him, but Senator Carper definitely wants to be able to move this. And he's waited a long time. And I believe that when we get to the end of the year, I think this year is going to be really critical. But when you see a state like Wyoming putting in this full program right now, that's pretty, that's a pretty big step. As you maybe see my horses in the background there, but I ride horse. And what I'm trying to tell people is we need a half halt, not quite so fast. We need to make sure that we have this in place. We can't just say, let's do a national pilot right now. We need to make sure that the factors are there so it can be successful and we can learn what we need to learn.
So recently you had an MBUFA quarterly meeting. I think it was last week or the week before. And one of the points one of the people at the meeting made is the importance of the state-based pilots because they build local acceptance of the concept of MBUF. Talk to us a little bit about that and how that's happened in the states.
Well, and I think for those of you that have followed the state pilots, you probably are all aware of this, probably believing that there's probably some people on the call that have not followed them quite so closely. But They're very different. Hawaii, for example, is doing a mileage-based odometer reading when they come in for their annual check, to everything from Minnesota doing a fleet. They're using, I think they have 5,000 participants in like, I can't remember, it's not a smart car, I can't remember which one. I think our car they're using, and a few other, app-based transportation providers to really major projects like, the I-95, Washington State. But I think that what I believe will be happening from some of these conversations I've had is that there's a desire to use state pilots in the future to delve into the national pilots. So I think there might be more of a look or more of a criteria in the future state pilots to have some of their information be able to generate information of how it could help a national pilot.
Let's talk a little bit about that national pilot. Also, during your quarterly meeting recently, there was discussion about how whenever anybody talks about VMT, like a national VMT program, it's always 10 years out. 10 years ago, we talked about VMT and a national pilot is 10 years out. We talk about it now and it's 10 years out. It's like, it's always this sliding scale. And there seems to be a desire in Congress, or at least among the staff, to put a stake in the ground and say, look, we're going to make progress toward that 10 years out. It's going to be, 10 years from today and not 15 or 20 years. Talk to us about that.
Well, that was the first I had heard of that, but it doesn't surprise me because I actually find Congress, and I think it's because they're looking at the numbers. They have to look at the numbers every day of what the trust fund's bringing in and what they're having to bring from the general fund over. And there's a desire to, and we did hear the fact that they want to have this system in place in 10 years. That was the first I'd heard that. And I think that what they want to try to be able to do is use this authorization, the 5-year authorization, to really get a good handle on what a national concept would be for the United States, and be able to start implementing in the next reauthorization. I mean, the next authorization that'd be coming up. Personally, everybody says it's too fast. I think it's doable myself. I think it's doable. I was on a call last week with somebody who said, well, they didn't think the technology would be available. And I'm like, no, the technology is completely there. Every meeting we have, our members are so up to date on technology. I am so surprised. It's really us keeping up on the policy side and what's doable and what's not doable. So, hearing this, that they want to be able to try to have this implemented in 10 years, I actually had heard another person say 5 years, another very substantial person, a chairman of one of the committees. And so I think that we're going to be pushed fairly dramatically, but I think 10 years might be realistic.
Our guest today on Café IBTTA is Barb Rohde, Executive Director of the Mileage-Based User Fee Alliance from Pettibone, North Dakota. That's not the headquarters of MBUFA. That's where Barb's from. MBUFA's headquarters in Washington, D.C., but never forget your roots, okay?
No.
North Dakota, population 62, right?
62, yeah.
Okay.
And we still have our farm there. So I'm back 3 or 4 times a year. And as I tell people, people feel sorry for me that I have to live on the East Coast because they think where they live, it's perfect. So, but you know what, it really has been helpful to me on this particular issue because rural is such a major consideration. And I always tell people, nobody hardly, I've only met one person from Louisiana that's from a smaller town than I am. So, and I grew up in this area. I grew up on a farm. So, so I know rural, and rural people aren't dumb, and rural people are good business people. And I think that, you know, if it's sold correctly to them, I think they could be I'm not saying they will be, but I'm saying that they could be, supporters.
You heard it here first. This could become a tweet. Rural people are not dumb. Right? Let's put it out there. Let's let everybody know emphatically. All right. We are taking your questions on mileage-based user fees. And here's a question from Emmett Murphy. Should each mile traveled be charged the same, or should per mile pricing vary by location, HOV status, vehicle type, traffic flow, etc.? What do you think, Barb?
Well, that's exactly what we need to study. But, Wyoming, the legislation they have before their General Assembly right now, I don't think anybody's on from Wyoming, but I've looked at this legislation. I'm very impressed with what they've done. They are using they're going to charge everything from motorcycles to those 3 tandem trucks. I'm sure there's a nice name for them, but and for that, as I remember it, they're planning to use the same fee for everyone, but that can change. I mean, that's flexible. I think one of the great things about this system is it's very flexible. I mean, you can have some areas where it can be a higher rate, and it's just really, I mean, I'm not a technology person, but it seems to me from what I've been told by people is that it's easier to do than it can be in some other areas.
Dave Christic has a question/observation. He says the Federal Highway Administration has an RFP now considering proposals for a national RUC program, proof of concept program, drawing on existing state pilots or programs. Are you aware of that? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I'm aware of it. I haven't heard much about it, and I'm not sure what they're attempting to do with this. But I do know that on March 3rd and 4th, I'm a part of, with another 20 people or so, for Federal Highway to talk about a national pilot. And I think that as much information as we can get is good. I mean, I really think the more information that we can draw from a variety of people, we're even looking way outside our borders. I mean, we took our members to New Zealand 2 years ago to look at theirs. We're working with Australia on their pilot. Tomorrow we're doing a webinar with the European Union, and we're really trying to gather as much information because this is unique. The United States is unique in looking at this because we're doing light vehicles, which many of these places are not. So we're really trying to get as much information as possible. So I think it's I'm looking forward to whatever they provide. But my one caveat with this is that I think the Hill's moving faster than what a proposal and all that will be.
You're getting some nice shout outs here from friends and colleagues. Bernie Arsenault says, I've known Barb for many years, and today I learned that in addition to being a political leader, she an MBUF advocate, she rides horses. Okay, so another undiscovered feature of Barb. And Rowdy Chemnitz says, I know Pettibone, North Dakota. I have family in Bismarck, and we hunt out there. Okay, so good hunting in Pettibone.
There is, yes. But now, I hate to tell him we post our land, so he probably won't be too happy with me, but it is good. It is good hunting there.
Right. Okay, here's a question, Barb. How will this effort to promote mileage-based charging overcome concerns about privacy and Big Brother? Wow, this is the thorny issue of thorny.
It is. Huh? It truly is. And I think many of you know one of my board members, Adrian Moore from the Reason Foundation. But we laughed that when we started going to Capitol Hill offices, and we visited 100 offices, I think, in 6 years. So we really saw a lot. We thought pies would be thrown at us, and it was pretty much due to the privacy issue. The one thing that I will say is that it's still, let me tell you, that is still a major issue. But as we have Capitol Hill staff, we have, members of Congress and senators getting younger, what I'm seeing is that, it's still an issue, but it's dropping as an issue. I actually find right now the administrative costs are almost as big of an issue on who I am dealing with on Capitol Hill as the privacy, but privacy is still a major issue. And, I must say, I was part of the I-95 pilot a couple of years ago. And I remember the first time after I found my OBD2 port, I have to say, it took me a little while to find that, but once I found it, and I started, as I pulled out, I thought, wow, I'm going to know every mile I go and wherever. And, that lasted about 2 seconds with me. And then what happened was I got so enamored by the information I could be getting. Like for those of you that live in the DC area, I spend the weekends in Virginia. And when I was coming back into DC, yeah, on I-66, it would show me the device I had, where I was stalled. I mean, not stalled, but where I was in traffic.
Right.
And so every Monday morning, I would be so anxious to get on my machine, on my computer to log out to see what had happened. And I'm just wondering if that'll happen to other people. But yes, privacy is still an issue. But I do think we have to give people choices. And I think that everything from to, I don't know, Oregon at the beginning had a flat fee. I know they had to go away from that, but I think we really have to give people choices. But privacy is still a major issue, and it's something we continue to wrestle with.
I had a similar experience to you with finding that port, what do you call it? The
OBD2 port. Yes,
port. I found it. And then I really enjoyed looking at the data that was coming up on my phone. I mean, it's sort of like you've got a health app there that tells you how far you walked and,
exactly.
how many steps and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of interesting to know, I had an aggressive, depression of the brake pedal, at 11:36 in the morning. Yeah,
exactly. It's a little bit like having a Fitbit on your car.
Yeah.
I don't have a Fitbit, but from what I'm told by people.
But it's for you. It's information for you. Here's a question. Now, how do you think VMT fee programs will impact future alternative fuel / electric vehicle adoption? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's really what's driving this right now, myself. I mean, for those of you that were on our quarterly meeting last week, we had Secretary Kim of California speaking, and he was talking about, kind of the climate change issues for California. But, almost every day you get up and read about a new policy that's gone in place about electric vehicles. I read that Ford is going to change to electric vehicles in Europe, I think by 2030, California by 2035. And, I will say that I am old enough to remember when California, that we had California cars and regular cars, like because of the catalytic converter thing in California. I don't know, it's like 5 years or so that you had California. And, the car companies just decided, no, we're not going to build two kinds of cars. And I really see, I mean, don't quote me on this, but one of my members told us that 13% of all the licensed vehicles in the United States are in California. So if when they make a decision like this, it has impacts on the whole nation. And I think that, I think the alternative, I think that's what's driving this immensely to move quickly on this issue.
Well, yeah, especially when you consider that the Biden administration is considering 500,000 electrification points across the country and converting the entire federal fleet to electric vehicles. Right. Yeah, you're not going to get the money from the fuel tax, right?
Right.
So here's a note from alert viewer David Pickrell. He says, unfortunately, the OBD2 ports will become closed off by under the new SAE standard for cybersecurity, but there will be ways around this to get vehicle data. So.
Well, we're working with a lot of we're just starting on this. One of our newest members, Panasonic, is working with us at the car companies because of in-vehicle automation. And that's not been something we've really worked on very much. But I do believe that, some of the members that we share jointly, Pat, told me that for toll companies, they have to look 10 years in the future at least, because they have to have equipment ready when these policies change. And I think that's somewhat true with car companies right now too, because I think they want to start thinking about being ready.
Barb, I have to make a couple of announcements, but then I'm going to come right back to you to get your final words of wisdom before we depart today, okay?
All right.
So viewers, don't forget to complete the survey that you'll receive at the end of today's program. The next big event on our virtual meeting calendar is IBTTA's book club discussion group on March 18 at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The book, The Color of Law, A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. In this groundbreaking history of the modern American metropolis, Richard Rothstein, a leading authority on housing policy, explodes the myth that America's cities came to be racially divided through de facto segregation, that is, through individual prejudices, income differences, or the actions of private institutions like banks and real estate agencies. Rather, the color of law makes clear that it was de jure segregation, the laws and policy decisions passed by local, state, and federal governments that actually promoted the discriminatory patterns that continue to this day. This book discussion is sponsored by IBTTA's Task Force on Diversity, Social, and Racial Inclusion. You can learn more about the task force, the book group, and all our events by visiting the IBTTA website. And please, don't forget to complete the survey at the end of today's program. So Barb, what final words of wisdom do you have before we sign off today?
Well, I would just say that it's going to be a very fascinating year on this issue. We really appreciate so many members of IBTTA being members of MBUFA because their insight is really helpful. They've had a long-term look at this. And I think that, you know, any information you can provide, but I would be surprised is if we get to the end of the year that we don't have a national pilot in place, not ready to go, but legislation that will start this.
One final thing, Barb, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to promote IBTTA's Transportation Finance Summit, and I think we have a slide for that with the dates April 19 through 21. Please be sure to look at our website for additional agenda items there. And Barb, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today. Always fun to talk about Pettibone, North Dakota. And we have so many more questions in the queue. I think we're going to have you come back for some other program related to MBUF, RUC, VMT. And so everybody watch your websites for more information about that. Barb, thank you again. To the IBTTA members, be safe, keep in touch, and we'll see you down the road. Thank you.
Thanks so much.